The problem is that we don't live in the short term. We live for the long term. I don't know about anybody else, but I don't know what the long term is for me. But for most of you in the audience, the long term is a long way down the road. And we are cultivating a series of problems that the market seems to be able to ignore, which is kind of surprising. But and on the other hand, the stock market has always ignored the long term and focused on the short term. And that's a very unfortunate aspect of it. So what do we have here today in the long term that's troubling me? Number one, we have a diminution of consumer protections. Number two, we have some of the things in the Dodd-Frank Act that are being taken away from us, some protections that were put in there to make sure we didn't have a crisis like the last one, including particularly, sadly, the Volcker rule.
Absolutely.
Trying to, in the most tentative way, trying to separate banking from investment banking. There's a lot of risk in investment banking that was thrown over into banking, and that's why I think every bank...
With deposit insurance backing it up. That
Sure.
was the big issue for Paul Volcker.
I think just about every bank in America eliminated their dividends back in 2008. And that's something that's never happened before in history. So I don't think we're back at that point, but we've given up some of the things that came along there. And then when you look more broadly, some of the long-term problems that affect our nation are being, I think, ignored. One, of course, is climate change. There's a lot going on out there. We hardly need to belabor that. And it seems to be accelerating. And there's a point of no return and all that. So that's a very scary thing. And maybe in a little softer or more subtle way, two things that should not happen in our country, or three actually, are happening. One is the division between the wealthy and the not wealthy, or even those that are in poverty, has widened. We should be narrowing that gap, but it's been widening. And part of the reason it's been widening is because we have done something that's great for corporations and wealthy people, but means very actually negative for the average taxpayer. I read a piece of data the other day.
You mean the recent tax cuts?
Yeah, the recent tax cut. The recent tax cut for corporations.
That are permanent.
Yeah, that are permanent. And that over the next 10 years, that saves the corporations something like $50 billion.
Yeah.
How do we individuals come out of that? Because the present tax cuts are going to be repealed in a few years.
Temporary.
Assuming that happens. And that is the corporations got $50 billion of tax benefit over the next 10 years. And individuals get a benefit of minus $83 billion. I mean, that is shocking. It's inexcusable. It's, I think, more hidden than it should be. And yet you see the Treasury Department talking about another $2 trillion of tax savings when...
That they're going to do by regulation.
Yeah.
And there's a legal opinion in the Bush administration that says that is illegal. You can't do it that way.
No. Well, to me, I'm very unhappy with what's going on in Washington. Not so much as a political matter, but as an economic matter. This is not good for America. The situation with Social Security and Medicare has gotten even worse. There seems to be no backbone to stand up and be counted and fix it. And it would take so little. If I could add a little anecdote about that, I was interviewed a few years ago, and Paul Volcker was on the stage with me. And I was asked about Social Security. And I said, look, if you'd make me and Paul czars, we could fix Social Security in a matter of hours. Just
Wow.
little fixes here and there. And Paul looked up and he said, couldn't we fix everything? And then another thing that's deeply troubling is the seeming growth in racial division in the country. This is a multicultural country. It is getting increasingly so, and yet we seem to be fighting to keep things the way they were. And the way they are going to be here is going to be different than the way they were. And I'm not taking any position on whether I like the old way better or the new way better, but the world is going to change, and this nation is just going to have to do it, change with it. You can't.
Well, we're a nation of constant change.
Yeah, of course
From
we
the
are.
beginning, that momentum is the renewal of the American purpose.
Yeah. And we're also seem to be limiting America's greatest strength in terms of population growth, I mean, this nation has had for a long time virtually no, if not no, population growth, and we're trying to make immigration much tougher. All these things seem to me to be kind of surprising. And just one more thing, talking about the debt side, the federal government's going to have a deficit of $1 trillion this year. $1 trillion.
What does it consist of?
Well, that debt consists of bonds, and owned often by 60% of, I think, the Treasury bonds are owned by foreign countries. So there's a lot up in the air, and the long run outlook is quite concerning unless we summon the courage to act on it and the political will to act on it. And it doesn't look like that's going to happen today or tomorrow or this year, but at some point we have to reconcile the problems of the country with the realities that we face. We see chief executive salaries that are a joke, an absolute joke. Their salaries in the, say, last 25 or 30 years in real terms have gone up maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times, and the average wage of the people that are doing all the hard work, to be honest with you, have gone up 0 in real dollars in weekly compensation. And that spread, and why are we holding back wages in order to pay off executives? And stockholders too. You know, I always thought, and I feel like this still for Vanguard, the most important asset we have is the crew that comes in here to work every day, committed to our mission, wanting to do the best job they can, having a high level of integrity. That's the way to build a business. And yet corporations ignore that. Why? Because again, I keep coming back to this, because it's a long run problem and not so much a short run problem. It's called right sizing.
Absolutely. And I know one of your pet peeves is the carried interest deduction. Could you say a few words about that and your thoughts about that?
Carried interest, and I think everybody in the audience knows this, is the ability to turn what any normal person would call income into capital gains.
Yeah.
And it stretches your credulity as well as stretches the law, and there have been efforts to change it. At some point, both sides of the aisle in Congress were in favor of changing it, but somehow it didn't make it through this last tax law. I think there may have been some small adjustments in it, but why? You know, why are we?
Yeah.
First, it makes no economic sense and no logical sense, but second, as a matter of public policy, it enriches the rich, and I don't see what the point of that is. And I don't know if your audience realizes this, how substantial this control is, and that is Vanguard owns 8.5% of every company in America.
That's right.
And BlackRock probably owns about 8.5%. That's 17%. And State Street probably owns 4%. That's 22%. That's a quarter of all the stock in America in 3 firms. And that has its
Right.
own dangers. That
Yeah.
has its own dangers.
What would those be?
Well, the danger is a concentration of economic power.
Yes.
And it hasn't been abused yet. But we want to be with a very watchful eye, because all these 3 firms, the 3 biggest firms, are essentially the 3 biggest firms in the field, are index firms. And you know, the old Wall Street rule, if you don't like the manager, sell the stock. But the index fund cannot follow that rule because it
That's
holds
right.
the stock. So its rule, all logic would tell you, if you don't like the management, change the management or work to improve the management. That's logic. And we're now starting to do that to the extent we can.
You are starting to do that.
Grow and grow and grow.
You have 5 dreams for the future for our nation based on trust, ethics, and the regulation of the fiduciary role of the finance industry. Tell us about your 5 dreams.
Well, you have to remake the human soul to get all this done. Let me acknowledge that. So it will not be easy and it will take time. But sooner or later, I mean, what does fiduciary duty mean? It means putting the client first. If you run a hardware store down the street, You have to put the client first.
Right, or you'll be out of business.
Or you'll be out of business. In the financial industry, that doesn't seem to happen because the stock market goes like this. And let me say, I won't bore you with all the arithmetic, but if you don't index fund over the last, say, 35 years, I can't remember the number, you would have made 60 times on your money. And if you don't actively manage fund, you would have owned 40 times. A tremendous difference. But nobody's unhappy. Why would I be unhappy if I made 40 times in my money?
Right.
So we need people to study this. We need people to realize, see comparisons about how this works compared to how they've done and how they've costed it down. But I'm an idealist. I've always been an idealist. I have lived an idealist, and I will die an idealist. I can't help that. So these rules, these hopes and goals of an integrity-laden industry that puts clients first, fiduciary duty, responsible corporate voting, long-term focus on your investments, not turnover all the time. We know that that doesn't work. It can't work. The numbers take. It works for A, but not for B. So that will happen someday.
For you, the financial crisis of 2008 was an ethical crisis. I want you to give us a bit more of enough. In one part of that book, you say, enough is $1 more than what I need.
That's a quote from somebody else, maybe John D. Rockefeller, I don't know.
Yeah, so, but what's your thinking about what is enough and the role of money in measuring your value in the world?
Well, it would be a tragedy if your only objective in this world were to make money. Work itself is valuable. Work itself is fulfilling. How much you get paid is part of the system. How much you spend. One reason I don't care so much about money is that both Eve and I, or my wife and I, really don't like to spend. I don't like to go into stores. I do sneak a sweater of the LL Bean catalog every once in a while.
I hear you fly coach, is that right? I hear that you fly coach.
Yes, it suits me fine. I just can't imagine spending all that extra money for first class. I just can't imagine that, particularly with the company's money.
Right.
I mean, I can spend my own money on anything I want, and no one should complain about it. But it just seems like throwing money away.
Yeah.
Everybody tells me I'm totally wrong, by the way. One of my pals claims to have a license plate that says, "Fly first class, or your children will."
Ah, oh boy. Speaking of children, maybe we can wrap up with this thought. You have 6 children, 12 grandchildren. What do you see in the democratic process to control finance, to ensure greater equality, that every person is born equal, the Declaration of Independence? What do you see as the opportunity for some of your dreams, your 5 dreams as a starting point, to be realized for your family? I know your family is a key part of your identity in your life.
Well, what I've tried to do, or did try and do with my family when they were younger, and by the way, I should add, bragging a little bit, we also have
Go ahead.
6 great-grandchildren.
Great-grands. Oh, I didn't know about that. 6 great-grands. I knew about the 12 grandchildren, but not the 6 great-grands.
Well, my wife's a fabulous person and a fabulous mother.
This is
And
Eve.
I was, of course, doing a lot of
Mrs.
work,
Bogle.
traveling, maybe doing a little less family things than I should have been doing. I accept that criticism. But I thought my role was to live the kind of a life that my children could observe and say, that is the kind of life I want to live.